In one single day, I lost $13,000. And the next day, I lost another $13,000. And this is all because of Trump's tariffs. Just wait until I show you the calculations. There's a lot I want to talk about, and I'm gonna go on a bit of a rant, so buckle up. Hey guys, it's Adrian here, the Canadian in a t-shirt, and I was going to make a standard members-only video showing what stocks I'm buying in April. But check the date, it's Thursday, April 3rd, the day of Trump's tariffs, and all hell is breaking loose. My portfolio is on fire. So instead, I'm going to go on a rant, and I decided to make this video public and free for everyone. I'm sure you're all seeing red losses across the board, and a lot of you newer investors are probably freaking out, understandably so. This is the biggest crash we've seen since COVID, back in March 2020, and maybe you don't really understand what these Trump tariffs mean and what impact they'll have, so I hope that you find this video helpful. It's going to be a bit more raw and unscripted, but I will divide it into chapters, so feel free to skip ahead. I'll break down what these tariffs are, the ridiculous calculation they used to come up with these numbers, will these tariffs last, and what can we expect next. After that, I'll share my thoughts on what I'm doing with my portfolio, how to manage the storm, and finally, what stocks I'm buying today in my TFSA. You guys know, I try really hard to leave the politics out of it. Let's stick to facts and numbers. But heads up, I will have a chapter that's entirely speculation. Just my prediction on why Trump is doing these tariffs and what his plan really is. Months from now, we'll see if I was right. But first, here's the facts. Today, Trump lit the world economy on fire with his devastating reciprocal tariffs. The size of these tariffs are ridiculous, far worse than earlier predictions, which is why the market is crashing. Even the word reciprocal is totally false. Let's be clear, these are not reciprocal by any means. I'll show you. First, are tariffs always bad? Not at all. If they are used in a smart and strategic way. If you have targeted tariffs on specific industries, that can help the local economy and protect jobs. That's a good thing. Look at the steel tariffs last month, or the auto tariffs from last week. I may not agree, but there is logic there. There's a case to be made that it will help domestic manufacturing in the US. Let's be fair. Here in Canada, we have the same thing. We have targeted tariffs on dairy, for example, to limit milk imported from other countries. This is a tool we use to protect our local farmers. Every country does it, but you have to be smart. Now, Trump's tariffs, it's not a tool, it's an atom bomb. On top of the existing tariffs, he's placing a blanket 10% tariff on all goods from basically every country. A 10% tariff across the board, that's already devastating, and I hate it. But again, let's be fair, there is a case to be made to help US manufacturing 5 to 10 years down the line. But he is calling these tariffs reciprocal, and that is absolutely not true. They are charging tariffs on countries that don't have any tariffs against the US. By definition, that is not reciprocal. He is starting a trade war, he's throwing the first punch. You don't get to play the victim and claim self-defense. As an example, look at Israel. US gives them hundreds of billions in foreign aid and military aid, but they removed all tariffs against the US, and now the US is charging them a 17% tariff. That's not reciprocal. Here's a funny example. The Heard and McDonald Islands. They're getting a 10% tariff, but there are no humans living there. It's just penguins. The penguins are getting a 10% reciprocal tariff as payback, I guess? Now, if these tariffs were actually reciprocal, that would be understandable. If China hits the US with a 10% tariff, the US should slap back with 10%. That's fair and reasonable, no problem. But that's not what's happening. The US is blowing things way out of proportion, especially on poorer, developing countries. We'll look at Madagascar. They are being hit with a 47% tariff, the second highest in the world. And why? Their justification is laughable. This is the table that Trump shared in his announcement. This column is what he claims each country is charging against the US in tariffs and trade barriers. And to be nice, he is only going to retaliate by charging back half that amount. If those numbers were true, okay, that's fair, but it's all BS. Japan isn't charging 46% tariffs against the US. The actual number is closer to 3%. Madagascar is not charging a 93% tariff against the US. Just wait until you see how they came up with this number. These numbers are so dishonest for two main reasons. First, Trump is claiming that these countries have blanket tariffs of 50%, 80%, 90% on all goods. That's just not true. Remember, most tariffs are targeted on one specific industry, like Japan has tariffs specifically on American cars, but each industry is different. That's why it's hard to boil it all down to just one number. On average, Japan is charging about 3% in tariffs against the US, certainly not 46%. But now Trump is turning around and hitting Japan with half of that made up number, a 24% tariff against one of our closest allies and biggest trading partners. What do you think that will do to the price of cars and electronics? Now the second reason, how they actually calculated these numbers. It's honestly hard to believe. The calculation of these numbers have nothing to do with tariffs. These numbers are based entirely on the trade deficit with that country. Basically, how much they sell to the US versus how much they buy. That's totally separate from tariffs. It's literally apples to oranges. Let's look at Madagascar. So Trump is making an outrageous lie and claiming that Madagascar is hitting the US with 93% tariffs. Here's the formula they are using to get to this number. I know it looks fancy and sophisticated, but it's actually nonsense. First of all, these two are not variables. They are just constants, and they actually cancel each other out. As a math major, I find this hilarious. It's a total waste of space. It's just there to look smarter. Here's the reality. Their tariff amount equals their trade deficit. That's US exports minus US imports divided by US imports. What does that mean? Basically, how much Madagascar sells to us versus how much they buy from us. And Madagascar sells more to the US than they buy. That's why the US has a trade deficit with them. That's not a bad thing. It's totally normal. It has nothing to do with tariffs, and it's no reason to punish them. Let's go through the math. Madagascar bought 53 million from the US. That's US exports. Madagascar sold 733 million to the US. That's US imports. So we take 53 minus 733, that's negative because it's a trade deficit, and divide by 733. We get that crazy 93% number. But this is not a tariff. Madagascar is not hitting the US with a 93% tariff. That's just not true. In fact, tariffs aren't even part of this calculation at all. But now, Trump is using this made-up number to hit Madagascar with a very real and brutal 47% tariff. That's half of their made-up 93% number. Unbelievable. So what's the reality? Bottom line, like most developing nations, Madagascar sells more than they buy. Their economy is based on selling raw materials, namely food, spices like vanilla, sugar, coffee, and clothing. But they're a relatively poor nation. The people don't have money to buy luxury goods from the US. They're not buying Cadillacs and MacBooks. They sell more than they buy. That's why they have a trade deficit with the US. So this 93% tariff claim is nonsense. What's the truth? In reality, Madagascar doesn't really have any tariffs or barriers to trade. They do have a 20% VAT tax on imports. That's nothing new, it's been the same for years. Now, if you want to call this a tariff, okay fine, then Madagascar has a 20% tariff, not 93%. So, if Trump made the claim that this 20% tax is unfair, okay fine, then a reciprocal tariff would be 20%. That's a fair argument. But there's no excuse for hitting them with a 47% tariff. And we're seeing the same thing with countries like Vietnam and Cambodia. It's devastating, and to me it proves that Trump has a fundamental misunderstanding of what a trade deficit is. A trade deficit is not a bad thing. It's totally normal, especially for the US, the largest economy in the world. They have a trade deficit with half of the countries in the world, especially the poorer countries that rely on exports. It just means that they sell more than they buy. It's not unfair. They're not ripping us off. We're not subsidizing them. That's childish thinking. My guess is Trump is mixing up a trade deficit with a budget deficit. Now, a budget deficit is certainly a bad thing. That's when you spend more money than you make. You lose money over time, and eventually you have to pay back your debts. But that's not what a trade deficit is. The US doesn't owe money to Madagascar, it's just an accounting term. Trump makes these weird associations with words. With immigration, he hears asylum seeker, a refugee, and he confuses it with mental hospitals and insane asylums. They have nothing to do with each other. I think he's doing the same thing here. He has this weird obsession with trade deficits. It's not a budget deficit. It's not a bad thing, and it's totally normal. It's the same way we buy and sell clothes. Sometimes I'll sell old clothes, but not very often. Most of the time, I'm buying clothes. I'm in a trade deficit with the store, but they're not ripping me off. No, I'm just a customer. I'm buying goods in exchange for money. The US does the same thing. They buy cheap goods in exchange for money. That's called trade. Why do I have to avoid a trade deficit? Should I only buy a pair of jeans if I also sell an equal amount? Nonsense. In truth, the entire US economy is based on buying cheap goods and materials from around the world. Then the US will convert these materials into more expensive goods and sell those for a profit. That's why, until today, the US had some of the lowest tariffs in the world to encourage global trade. And that's why the US dollar is so strong and widely used as the world's reserve currency. That global trade maintains the demand for the US dollar. Because of these tariffs, we're already seeing the US dollar slip. We're already seeing the impact of these tariffs. Just today, China launched a 34% tariff back at the US. That's a true retaliation. And that's fair. They're hitting back equally. China and the US have had tariffs for many years, but they were targeted on specific sectors: steel, natural gas, etc. Trump claiming that China has a 67% blanket tariff on the US is just not true. Hitting China with an additional 34% tariff on top of the existing 20% means that Chinese goods now face a 54% tariff. That's huge. Look around your home and tell me how many goods are made in China. I know it's hard to beat the tariff on penguins, but I think this is the funniest part. The US Treasury Secretary begged other countries, please don't retaliate. Are you serious? You're going to hit countries with a 10% to 50% tariff and you don't want them to fight back? Too late, buddy. China already did. The European Union are coordinating a retaliation. Japan and Korea as well. It's unbelievable. To put this into perspective, the effective average tariff that the US is charging is now between 20 and 30% on everything. Last month, the US average tariff was only 2%, and it's been the same 2% for decades. The tariffs are increasing by 10 times overnight. Look at this graph. These will be the highest tariffs in over 100 years. The last time we saw tariffs this high, it basically caused the Great Depression. Even without retaliatory tariffs, just with the US alone, prices will go up. Make no mistake about it. The cost of tariffs will always be passed down to us, the consumers. This will be the single biggest tax increase on US citizens in history. Throw in the retaliatory tariffs from China and Europe and Japan, and it will get even worse. The price of everything will go up. Groceries, electronics. Based on some estimates, the average car will cost you $6,000 more. Price for clothes can shoot up 20%. Check the labels on your clothes. They are not made in USA. They are imported. I don't have to tell you, things are already tough, and we're gonna have to buckle up. With these tariffs, we as consumers pay the extra cost. Plus, if trade shuts down, we could get less options. Less competition means lower quality and higher prices. Oh boy. We'll get to my portfolio and what I'm doing, but first, let's do a bit of speculation. Why is Trump doing this? To be clear, this is just my prediction. We don't have the facts and we don't know what will happen yet. We'll find out in a matter of months. But here's my guess. I don't think the tariffs are here to stay, for a few reasons, but I'll save the biggest reason for the end. First, we've seen Trump run this play many times. He threatens tariffs, negotiates, and then backs down a few days later. Since he's been in office, he's done this every single month with Canada, with Mexico, and whenever they call his bluff, he's backed down. It's possible that he's committed this time, but maybe he's just trying to renegotiate trade deals, something he loves to do. Remember, just a few years ago, he was the one that ripped up NAFTA. And then he made NAFTA 2.0, and now he's going around complaining about that bad deal, the one that he made just a few years ago. This tactic can work in the short term, but it has long-term consequences. This can permanently damage international relations and long-standing trade agreements. We're already seeing that. China, Japan, and South Korea are working on new trade deals that can exclude the US. We're seeing the rise of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China moving away from the US dollar. The US is the most powerful country in the world. Yes, they can push around a small country like Vietnam or Madagascar, but they can't bully the whole world. Moves like this can seriously hurt the reputation and credibility of the United States. Put yourself in their shoes. If you were a foreign country, would you make a deal with the US? Knowing that 4 years from now, a new president can come in and pull the rug from under you? Trump is playing with fire here. Once you let that genie out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. Now, for my speculation, the biggest reason Trump is doing these tariffs is an excuse to justify his tax cuts for the rich and corporations. Let's talk numbers. They claim these tariffs will generate $6 trillion in revenue for the US government over the decade. I think that number is ridiculous. Economists are estimating way less than that, about $2 trillion. But okay, let's take their $6 trillion at face value. Remember this number, it will come back in a minute. Problem number one, this money isn't coming from other countries. These tariffs are paid by US consumers, not by China, not by Europe. This will be a $6 trillion tax on US citizens, the largest tax hike in US history. Problem number two, these tariffs are not sustainable. Even ignoring what other countries will do with retaliatory tariffs, this $6 trillion in revenue only works if you assume that trade will continue as normal. That's false. If you double the price of a car, sales will go down. You can't expect sales to stay the same and double your revenue magically. Same with these tariffs. Yes, the government will earn extra revenue, but with such high tariffs, global trade with the US will absolutely slow down, by definition. And once trade slows down, you're not going to be earning $6 trillion anymore. This is the interesting part. That's $6 trillion in revenue from tariffs, very convenient, but that number matches the $6 trillion cost of Trump's upcoming tax cuts. Remember, in Trump's first term, one of the only pieces of legislation he passed through Congress, not executive order, was sweeping tax cuts on the rich and corporations. And he wants to do it again, but this is very unpopular among American voters, even among his base. Trump ran on a populist message, fighting inflation and lowering grocery prices. Cutting taxes on the rich is not popular, for obvious reasons. In his first term, he slashed the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%. Now he's looking to cut it further to only 15%. Imagine that. A tax cut from 35 to 15%. In just a few years, the biggest corporations in the world will pay less than half in taxes. Meanwhile, everyday working Americans will pay more with these tariffs. So here's my guess. Trump isn't really serious about these tariffs. Maybe he'll renegotiate a few trade deals, but I think the real goal is to squeeze these new tax cuts through Congress. The US national debt is almost at $40 trillion. These tax cuts would add an extra $6 trillion to the debt, and conveniently, by their numbers, these tariffs could pay for it. We'll see what happens in the next several months to a year, but my guess is once they pass these tax cuts through Congress, which is what he really wants, then they will scrap the tariffs or they'll quietly ease them back. Let's see what happens, but it's going to be a bumpy road ahead. Well, my rant went longer than expected. We're already past 18 minutes, so I should wind down here. I'll save the rest for part 2. What I'm doing, my investing strategy, and what I'm buying. But I want to leave you on a constructive note. What should you do right now during this crash? For most people, nothing. Don't panic, don't sell. Hold onto your investments and continue to invest normally with whatever cash you have. I get the fear. I have lost almost $30,000 in just 2 days, but this is just a loss on paper. Unless I sell, I haven't actually lost a thing. In the long term, I'm confident it will recover. A lot of these companies won't actually be affected, especially if the tariffs don't last. Their stock is just dropping due to uncertainty and panic in the market. As long as you fundamentally believe in the future of these companies, then don't sell. In fact, I'm going to try to buy a little more and lock in that better value. Now, if you're invested in a company that could be devastated by these tariffs and you're not confident that they'll survive, then maybe you have to cut your losses and sell. It's tough, but that's the risk, and that's the danger with reckless tariffs and policies like these. Even if it's just short term, real companies will shut down, real people will lose jobs, and once they're gone, they're not coming back. I'll continue in part 2, hopefully in a few days. In the meantime, I have a whole playlist on how to invest during a market crash. I know these videos helped out a lot of you guys through 2020 and 2022, so I hope you find some reassurance and peace of mind there. Again, stay tuned for part 2, where I'll show you exactly what I'm buying in my TFSA during this market crash. I'll make that video public as well, and check out my members only videos to see more like that. Bottom line, guys, be careful out there, control your emotions, and focus on the long term. That's the hardest part of investing. Patience and discipline, especially at times like these. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you guys on the next episode of The Canadian in a T-Shirt. Bye guys.